Hello and welcome to Additive Insight, the original additive manufacturing podcast, and your source for news, interviews and comment on the latest 3D printing and AM intelligence, brought to you by TCT Magazine. I'm your host, Sam Davis, and today I'm joined by Foundation Alloy CEO, Jake Guglin. Foundation Alloy is taking solid-state metallurgy developed at MIT and UC Irvine and using it to produce next-generation alloys capable of performing in the most extreme environments. With its proprietary MetalsFirst technology, the company officially launched a series of molybdenum alloys in November of last year. These alloys are said to exhibit significant increases in strength compared to competitor products, with Foundation Alloy confident they can meet the needs of manufacturers in aerospace, defence and energy. Joining the Additive Insight podcast, Guglin explains how the MetalsFirst technology works, shares how much progress has been made with customers so far, and outlines the application opportunities for molybdenum alloys moving forward. If you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also head over to tctmagazine.com to subscribe to the TCT membership platform and receive more Additive Insight via our print and digital offerings. Jake, welcome to the Additive Insight podcast. We're going to talk today about the molybdenum alloys that Foundation Alloy is bringing to market and the application opportunities that they enable. But first, can you provide some insight into the background of Foundation Alloy, taking us back to the initial research work that was being carried out at MIT?
Yeah, I'd be glad to, though I have to be honest, it's not my story to tell necessarily. Foundation Alloy's technology started at MIT with Chris Hsu, who was a professor at MIT, the head of the material science department for some time, and is now the dean of engineering at Northwestern, actually. And early in his research, there was a body of work looking at the potential to make nanocrystalline alloys, which I think over time morphed then into thinking about what are new processing pathways that enable the ability to do new things with metals, like make microstructures that aren't possible with today's technology. And so that is really at the core of what that research was thinking about processing technologies, not just on the equipment set, not just on the processing pathways, but how can we actually design metals that enable new processing pathways too. So thinking about it from a material science perspective, and over many years and a lot of hard work by people far smarter than I am, that eventually became the bedrock, or the foundation, I guess I should say, of the technology that we're now bringing to market.
Okay, so can you explain a little bit about how you came into the project, and I guess the decision to spin out of MIT and commercialize? Were you part of that process? Did you come on board after that decision was made to do that? Where did you kind of fit in?
I got extraordinarily lucky is how I fit in. So I was actually a business school student. And I think a lot of people go to MIT and other business schools in hopes of finding this type of technology. And I was lucky enough that a classmate of mine, who was also in Chris's group, practices thesis defense in one of the classes I was in. And I didn't understand what transient phase sintering was, or nanocrystalline metals and all of these platforms, but I heard lighter, stronger metals, the ability to do things nobody else could do. And I latched onto it. And so Chris and I began a conversation that went on for 4 years. And in that time, I did my business school internship at SpaceX, where I saw how metals were a constraint on engineering, and I saw how the metal parts supply chain was a challenge. I then worked at Blue Origin, where it was part of my job to solve those problems. So working in supply chain, trying to cope with the complexity that was being built in to overcome those constraints. And then I was at an AI hardware company. And even there, you think computation, probably not a metals problem, but that's not true. When it came to thermal management, for example, like that is at its core a metals issue. And so Chris and I kept this conversation going over all those years. And truly so I saw the technology in September 2017. And in September, October 2021, Chris and I got on the phone and really started hammering on this a little bit. And we morphed from here's the technology set and here's how we want to talk about it, to what is the commercial vehicle that we can use to bring this to market that creates an advantage that we can then take advantage of to go out to market and win on economics and performance and whatever else. And that was the turning point. And when we saw, okay, here's the business model, here's how we actually go from cool science to better products, that we said, it'd be foolish at this point to not start the company. And we recruited in Jasper Lienhard, who is the day-to-day technical co-founder, and Tim Rupert, who is a professor with very complementary technology, onto the founding team as well, and went out and started the company.
And in terms of the science, so the proprietary technology that Foundation Alloy is bringing to market is called MetalsFirst. How does that technology work, and how is it different to what is already out there?
So there's a series of innovations that all come together into the platform. And the first is unique ways to engineer alloys. So we have patented methods from MIT, from UC Irvine, that we've created in-house that are a new way to think about how to design and engineer metals for both processing and then ultimate properties and performance. The second core innovation is that we really, I would argue, the best at this point at having scaled mechanical alloying. So there is historical issues around contamination, around variability, around scalability, and the cost of that stuff that we have proven that we can get over, and we have very tight controls. We get very limited variability in what we're outputting. And so really being able to take the unique capabilities of mechanical alloying in concert with those design methodologies. And then the last piece is we have just become the world experts in sintering as well. So we're using off-the-shelf equipment. However, all three of those steps we are utilizing knowing that the others are coming or preceding the next. And so what that allows us to do is design alloys that take advantage of the unique capabilities of mechanical alloying in order to sinter at lower temperatures and in less time, thus giving us a much better control over that final microstructure in the part. And so it's the three of them together that really create this technology set and this very unique, very powerful capability where we can sinter to full density. We use an order of magnitude less heat than in traditional sintering cycles. And that gives us, again, a far better level of control over the shape and size of grains and the microstructure, but also the composition and the phases present in that final piece. And we use all of that to create not only unique combinations of properties, but much higher order properties than what's capable with melt-based technologies.
Okay, so in terms of those properties, those characteristics, what can you tell us about those specifically? What performance, what capability can you enable with these materials?
Yeah, so I'll brag if I can about some of the work that is going on in the lab right now, which we have an incredible team that is applying themselves with vigor to all of these different applications and technologies. And so, in the world of tooling, steels have the strength necessary to go through the extreme forces and pressures of something like hot forging. However, steels through thermal cycles will soften over time. And so eventually you're limited in terms of the number of shots that you can hit on that before eventually it starts to deform in one way or another. And in a different situation, molybdenum alloys have incredible thermal properties, so are much more stable through those thermal cycles, however, are not strong enough to withstand the forces required in something like hot forging, which is something we're working on with a current customer. And so what we have been able to do is take a molybdenum alloy that has that thermal stability and raise its starting strength to that of steel. So we have something that is as strong as steel, but as resistant to thermal cycling as molybdenum. And so with that, we can then go out to the market and say, hey, we have a forging metal or a die metal for your forging applications that has solved the temper softening problem. And so if you are doing high rate or high force type forging where your tools are dying before the lifetime of what you need in terms of what you're trying to produce, here's an answer where we can put something in there that can last far longer, potentially even the lifetime of what you're trying to do, which saves an immense amount on operating costs. It saves an immense amount on maintenance labor. It saves an immense amount on direct tool costs too, because we can also provide that part without having to raise the price substantially over what you're paying for it today. And so it's that ability to take, a molybdenum alloy and basically double its strength over what the state of the art is. And think about that in the combination with the thermal properties, where that is a unique corner of, an Ashby chart, where all of a sudden you're opening up wholly new capabilities in the market.
when the company launched the kind of moly-classed alloys earlier this year, the press release referred to development and production bottlenecks of the legacy metals industry. You alluded to some there, I think. So what would you say are those bottlenecks? What are you addressing with these new materials?
Um, there, there's a lot. That's a pretty broad set of questions, I think, inherent in there. But I guess to speak specifically to the bottleneck keeping new metals from getting to market,
Mhm.
there is a pretty meaningful challenge in how a new metal is developed today with traditional metallurgy, and then tested and then scaled. And those steps largely are discrete. It's not a continuous pathway. And so even some of these really cool AI programs and AI companies where they're rifling through millions of different metals and they're saying this composition is going to look great. Then you have to try to find somebody else generally to go try to make that composition in a variety of ways, because as we know in metals, it's the processing that matters just as much, if not more, than the composition itself, because it's that microstructure that determines the properties in a large part. And that can take months, if not years, to get those first set of tests done. And now you run that cycle a bunch of different times, and finally you get to something that seems like it might work. But you've did that in maybe a hockey puck sized piece of metal. Now you have to figure out how to scale it. So do you build a foundry, which takes $150 million in 4 years to get that going, or do you try to go out to an industry that has absolutely zero spare capacity and try to convince somebody else to do the processing, engineering, and the investment, and all of that's necessary to try to take that metal to market now? It's kind of a no-win situation. It can be really challenging, and so um, it it tends to be a limiter and even a pretty firm barrier in actually bringing new things to market. And I think the last piece of that is that all of those companies that are designing right now are still designing within the traditional metallurgy melt-based space, and so they're limited to the physics of melting and solidification. And so for us, we address both sides of that, where one, we have a fundamental breakthrough in terms of what's possible. The MetalsFirst platform allows us to make compositions and microstructures that otherwise aren't possible. And that enables us to create properties and thus performance that otherwise aren't possible. So we have this fundamental breakthrough that allows us to make things that, thinking purely capitalistly, have a higher ROI as they're coming to market and a higher value to customers. And beyond that, the way that we design things in the lab and test them in the lab, we're actually making dozens of new candidates per week. And we don't just think about them. Once we have an idea, we actually make it, we process it into a part, and we test it. And so we have that full chain of data from composition, the whole processing history, and then empirically the microstructure that resulted, the mechanical properties that resulted, what that actually looked like. And because the processes, this mechanical alloying process we use in the lab, is very similar at every scale from a physics perspective, when we have something we like, we're basically ready to go. And we know exactly what that pathway looks like to deploy. And so from a bottleneck perspective, to go back to the question, not only are we able to deploy more quickly, and we have a faster path through development and a faster, clearer path to how to bring it to market, but we're able to do so with things that are higher value ultimately to the customers as well, which makes adoption obviously much easier. If the business case is, you're talking a 3 to 4x improvement on your money, it's much easier to make that case for adoption than if it's a 10% gain.
Yeah. In terms of establishing that business case with customers and partners and so on, at that stage you're obviously in discussions with the customer pretty intensively. To get to that point, how much of a challenge has it proved to be when you're bringing a differentiated product to market? There's a bit of an education piece.
Mhm.
Engineers like to work with what they know and what they can trust, and they've got years and years and years of data and so on. So how difficult has it been to go into these companies and present a new offering that perhaps they're not all that familiar with?
It is definitely a challenge, but I'll say this is another area where our technology is uniquely enabling us to do this in a different way, because instead of going in with a slide deck that says, hey, here's a potential metal that I could potentially make for you that is going to potentially solve some of your problems, we say, do you want to have a piece of it? Let us make you a demonstration part and you test it in whatever way you test things. And we just let it speak for itself. And that not only helps us get in more quickly, but it actually allows us to develop alongside customers. If you think about like a software development loop where you're sending something out and letting people play with the tool, and you can develop with them, we're doing the same thing. And there was a great example this summer where one of our scientists had a concept for a new steel in late May or early June. So we started making it, we iterated on it, we played with composition, we played with processing, we played with some heat treatments, and we put it in a customer's hands for the first time in mid-July. So 6 weeks from concept to that first delivery. And now that first delivery, they played with it and they said, hey, there's a couple things that are good, but there's a bunch of stuff that's also bad. Like, we wouldn't buy this the way it is. So we took it back, we reiterated, we started solving those problems, and we put a new sample in their hands. I think it was end of August or early September, and they tested it and they said, great, we're interested in this. And so now we're in process of actually making a dozen of the parts that they want to test, which are going to be shipping end of this week or Monday. And they're going to go put it through functional test and do ours versus the incumbent in a variety of different things to see where we win. And so that is how we're trying to get into customers. And that's how we've been able to get over that very right engineer skepticism, is by saying, hey, you don't have to trust our math. You don't have to trust these pretty graphs. Like, here it is. You test it in the way you want to test it and tell me what needs to change, or tell me you want to buy it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So for audiences, the context at the timeline there, we're recording this mid-November. So you basically started there in June, early June, and how many months is that? 4 or 5?
Yeah. So in 5 months, we've done 2 iterations with the customer's own feedback and are now delivering actual parts for functional testing.
Okay.
In 5 months.
Okay, and so that's one example. Generally, in terms of customer engagement, application development, how much of a progress has been made? Are you in a situation like that with multiple customers currently?
Yeah, so we have parts of a variety. So that was actually a steel. That wasn't even the moly-classed family of alloys, but we have parts of a variety of different products in a variety of different applications across about a dozen customers right now are currently banging on metals, heating them up, pulling on, doing whatever it is they want to do to test them. And several of those now are starting to transition into actual purchase order conversations, or not even conversations, negotiations. So we are in the midst of negotiating our first couple of production purchase orders as well.
Okay, so as the moly classed alloys exist today with the capabilities that they're capable of today, what are the kind of application opportunities that foundation alloy will enable in the short to medium term?
I have to be careful with this one. I don't want to overplay the hand too much in terms of where we're working, but I think there's 2 categories really, which is where is molybdenum used today, and can we improve the economics of those components, both on the cost side, but also on the value side, so the performance side. So some of our MC700 alloy, for example, it is a pure molybdenum alloy with a much finer grain structure made through our process. And the result is isotropic properties, which is very uncommon and challenging in molybdenum alloys, higher strength than this current standard molybdenum alloy, excellent ductility, and because it's made through our sinter-based processes, there's the potential for near net shape parts. There's a geometric freedom, and that also has the potential to save quite a bit of waste in the processing side of things. So that's the type of thing where we can go look at what is being used today and say, can we help you with geometry? Can we help you re-engineer that part in a way that allows you to take advantage of the greater strength? Or can we just help you on the supply side of things where you can get something faster, closer to what you actually want, and potentially more economically? On the other side, there's what we talked about earlier, which is how far can we elevate these properties to actually allow something like a molybdenum alloy to go compete in markets that right now it can't? And so that is looking at things like tooling. So we're working in hot forging, hot die forging, isothermal forging, high pressure die casting. And so can we go compete against the world of tool steels, for example? And then there is sort of the holy grail of refractory alloys as well, which is solving ductility issues at room temperature, solving oxidation issues at high temperature, and putting these up as the next generation high temperature alloys to go beat nickel superalloys. And that is something where we have solved the room temperature ductility issues in many of our alloys. We are starting to see that we have very real pathways to solving the oxidation issues. Now, it's obviously going to take time for us to plug those two things together, but I think that is where there's a lot of excitement over the long term to say, let's go unlock a couple 100 degrees of operating temperature in some of those applications and see what we can do there.
Okay. Yeah, because I was going to come on to the product roadmap, I guess, and I appreciate you won't want to reveal all of your R&D secrets, but it was mentioned when the launch announcement came earlier this year that the alloys released so far are the first in a series. So, what are you able to tell us at this stage about what is to come in terms of the product portfolio?
So and I'll be very transparent here, like we are only scratching the surface with this. This really is a wholly different way to make metals. And I think if we decided to just stick with molybdenum, we probably have 20 years of work to do to even begin to explore what is possible in that space. But the technology itself is not stuck on any given family of alloys. And so, as I've said, we're already working on steels, and we have a family of steels that's in a couple different customers' hands for a couple different applications already. In the past, we have worked on nickel superalloys. We've done tests with aluminum. Some of the technology that comes out of Tim Rupert's lab is specifically looks at aluminum and copper, but again, is broader than that. And so over time, from a product portfolio perspective, we really think that when we look at engineering metals and those high performance metals, we should be able to play in just about all of those spaces. We are largely letting the commercial markets and the customers dictate where we go, thinking about where are the largest, ripest, lowest hanging fruit where we can go make money in the near term and let that fund future development as we go along. But I think we have a lot left to do in the molybdenum space, where we think we can really own the boundary of what's possible there, and we think we're pretty close. And then steels are the most highly engineered, the most highly invested in material class probably in the history of the world. I don't think that's too hyperbolic to say. And yet here we are 3 months or 5 months into that endeavor, already having a couple things that are competing against the incumbents. And so I think that'll also be, a pretty deep pot that we can dig into for years to come.
Mm-hmm. One thing I wanted to touch on that was also, I think, mentioned in the launch announcement was that Foundation Alloy is manufacturing these alloys in the United States. And obviously there's, over the last few years, been a bit of a trend in terms of reshoring in the US. So how important is that to the company, and how important is it proving to be among prospective customers?
Yeah, so for us, there's a patriotic bent to it to a degree. Like we, almost all of the team, born and raised here. The technology was born here. Our investors are from here, and so if we can, obviously, we want to contribute to rebuilding that manufacturing sector in the U.S. But it also just makes sense for us, and where we stand today. I'm sure as everyone does, I was reading through Fed data on Sunday night, and I found it really interesting to look at the labor productivity curve over the last 30 or 40 years, which was flattened. And that's a big narrative that people are talking about these days. But if you look at the manufacturing capital productivity curve, it has been on a downward trend for that same 40 years. We are actually getting less productive on that capital over time. And I think that has not only been driven by the offshoring thing, but it is part of why we have done that. And so for us, we have a fundamentally different capital productivity profile, and that actually makes it so that it's more economically sound for us to stay here. We have partners that we work with all across the country on machining, on testing, on a variety of different pieces of our development and our deployment. And being able to keep things close, being able to monitor that, engage with them in real time, has allowed us to move more quickly and be more competitive in the markets. And so I think keeping the manufacturing here, building great jobs here, all of that is both a patriotic endeavor, but also is just economically sound strategy for us. And for our customers, it's interesting. If you look at our customer set, I think the majority of them are actually international customers. And a few months back, we plotted a map of all of our partners that we work with on our manufacturing side, and then all of our customers and who they currently buy from. And it is actually a picture of what reshoring looks like, because all of our customers currently are buying from China or Sweden or Indonesia or Japan, and instead now are starting to buy from us. And so I think that has been cool to see that, it turns out a really good way to think about onshoring and reshoring is to be the only game in town, or to be the ones that are providing the most value. And then they sort of have to come to you.
I want to ask a question now that I usually would ask at the start of an interview, but what would you say is the kind of overriding motivation of Foundation Alloy?
There are many, and a lot of them are baked into the name, actually. But metals are the core input into the entire industrial sphere. As we talked about a little bit in the beginning, that metals industry is tough right now. You don't see a lot that's new that's coming to market. The economics are really hard. The physics of melt-based technologies, we have optimized to the nth degree. There's not a ton of juice left to squeeze there. And we're seeing the ramifications in development cycles and what that is doing to the engineering complexity and sophistication necessary to try to move performance up in advanced systems. And so a lot of it is that we think if we can create a whole new world of higher performance metals that are not more expensive necessarily, that are easy to access, that have a supply chain that allows you to adopt them in real term, we can elevate the entire industrial world and all of the technologies that are coming out today, and that could be invented in the years to come if we had that broader palette to paint with, so to speak, in terms of these inputs. And the other side of it is like the founding team, we want to live in that world. Chris and I are both unabashed sci-fi nerds, and so there's something in the name that we wanted to allude to, and in many ways name it after the Isaac Asimov trilogy, Foundation, and because that's the type of world that seems exciting to be part of building. I tell my wife all the time that I want to retire on the moon, and we're not going to get there if something doesn't change. She does not seem particularly willing to do that, though, so I might have to change that dream. But yeah, the motivation is really to think about, if we can do what we say we're going to do, we can help create that rising tide across a huge breadth of industrial technologies that could really help the world be safer, more exciting, more sustainable. And what better way to spend your time?
Yeah, absolutely. Finally, Jake, and thank you for your time today. Thinking long term and maybe not quite as long as retiring on the moon, what's your vision for the company? What do you want to achieve with Foundation Alloy?
Quite frankly, it's a very similar answer. So we talk about this a lot in the context of investment and the product portfolio and the product roadmap. But if we can do what we think we can, we should be able to consistently over time release products that redraw the line of what's possible in given engineering metals verticals. So if we're looking at 5, 10, 15 years from now, we should have created a family of higher performance steels. We should have created refractory alloys that completely change what's possible in those worlds. We should be able to create nickel superalloys that open up whole new possibilities there as well. And we can play in titaniums and aluminums. And so it sounds grandiose to say it that way, but the technology really, I think at its core, is that fundamental where if it is what we think it is, and thus far evidence seems good, this is not a 5-year, 10-year journey. This is the start of a new learning curve that we should be able to continue to apply, not only in new ways, but then in next generations of each thing. These moly class alloys are super powerful, but by no means are the optimal of what's possible in any way. And so I think the long-term vision of this is that hopefully 10, 15 years from now, we have moly class generation 6 that's coming out alongside this tungsten alloy and these steels, and there's our nickel superalloys that have become the state of the art, and we're continuing to grow and learn and proliferate those things across the world.